Hi, my name is Kathy Sipple, and I want to welcome you to today's episode of the CoThrive podcast, where we speak with thought leaders who guide us in new and emerging models of the true sharing economy. For past show archives, news, and upcoming events, you can check out our website at cothrive.org, or you can join us on Facebook or Twitter. You can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or anywhere podcasts are found. Again, I'm your host, Kathy Sipple, and with me today, I have two very special guests, Professor Edgar Cahn and his wife, Dr. Chris Gray. They are joining me from their home in Washington, D.C., which is the home base for Timebanks USA and the whole, Timebanks movement in North America. Edgar is the author of several books, including Time Dollars, the new currency that enables Americans to turn their hidden resource, time, into personal security and community renewal, and also No More Throwaway People, the co-production imperative. And Chris earned her doctoral thesis at UCLA, and I might have to have her correct me on the title. I can't read my own writing, but it's called The Tribal Movement. And Chris, why don't I turn it over to you right now? Tell me the rest of that long title. I think this is a cool thing too, because you wrote something and this is what actually made somebody say you need to meet Edgar, right?
Very, very true. So it's a very academic title. It's The Tribal Moment in American Politics, the Struggle for Native American Sovereignty. That's it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And Edgar had also written a similar piece, is that right?
He had. So Edgar had written a book a long time ago called Our Brother's Keeper, the Indian in White America. And as I was researching for my doctorate, which is really a history, it's from 1776 to 1976. Only for some reason, the publisher did not want me to put those dates in there. I'm not sure why. But I was going around meeting with tribal leaders from the American Indian movement and beyond. And they kept telling me, you must meet Edgar Cahn. He wrote the book that we used to organize. Have you met Edgar Cahn? And I said, no. And it took me a long time. This was before the days of internet. It took me a long time to track him down, but I eventually did.
And Edgar, how do you remember this meeting?
I remember it was a Saturday afternoon phone call, and the phone rang, and this British voice started asking me questions that I hadn't been asked for at least 15 years about Native Americans and about our colonialism and, frankly, our genocide. And I had to say that on the one hand, the book was an expose of that, but also it needed to celebrate the values and the traditions that we are the inheritors of, but that we take for granted and that we do not value adequately, and that we're beginning to rediscover in a world where ecology and nature and our relationship to something called planet Earth is becoming more important.
So with that first experience of you two meeting each other, what led from that into time banking? Edgar, you had already been involved with time banking and then Chris joined, or how did that exactly happen?
Time banking came from the civil rights movement, from an attempt in the war on poverty to require maximum feasible participation, so we were not just delivering services to people, but we were enlisting the people as partners. And out of that grew a sense that we're still in the business of funding services to people that define them by what's wrong with them, by what they're missing, by what they need, and failing to value who they are and what they can contribute. And yet it was clear from those efforts that the engagement of community as partner, the engagement of people whom we were defining as needing help, was in fact the critical missing ingredient. And so it was partly that, And it was partly that in 1980, I had a major heart attack that blew away 60% of my heart. And they gave me 2 years and maybe 2 hours a day that I could function. And I thought, what do you do with 2 hours a day? Because I'm not going to give it away and I can't throw it away if it's all I've got. And I thought, well, we can create a kind of money that honors the hour. And people at that point began to think maybe that heart attack had hit another organ. But they said, all right, go ahead and try. And I think that I'm alive today because every day I wake up with a sense of purpose and a sense that those hours are not to be wasted.
So Edgar did all that. He started this in 1980 when, in fact, time banking, there have been times in history when people have tried this, most notably in the UK during the beginning of the industrial era, when there was a tremendous amount of just, oh my goodness, the working classes were treated brutally, but there were some reformers. But in any case, when Edgar started it, it was brand new. Nobody else was doing anything like this. And as he said, people thought he was crazy. How can you do this?
And you don't invent new kinds of money. This was way before any of the attempts at cryptocurrency that later evolved.
Yeah, this was. So anyway, I called Edgar up to do my research, and we sort of hit it off on the phone.
I think we hit it off, yeah.
We had the most wonderful, wonderful, wonderful conversations. So I did the interview with him, and then I sent off the transcript to the interview, and I thought, I can't just let this go. I'm going to be very forward and very unprofessional and write a little personal email saying, I've really enjoyed interviewing you and might we have more conversations? And he wrote back, yes. So for 6 weeks, we spoke every night, didn't we? It was across, I was in Los Angeles at UCLA, Edgar was here in Washington, D.C. And we spoke and spoke and spoke. And Edgar told me about time banking then. And Edgar was and is, you've just heard him, on mission. I mean, there was no like ifs, ands, or buts. This is my purpose in life. And I, meanwhile, was sort of wandering around saying, what is my purpose in life? And so here, he got one ready-made. It's like, yay, I have a purpose in life as well. So anyway, we got married. I started eagerly learning all about time banking. And I'll tell you from the very get-go, I used to call it a problem space, in the best sense of the word, that it was a place where you could come and kind of think, how's that happening? What's happening there? Ooh, what's that? It was a place to sort of figure out things. You've probably experienced that yourself. And
I have.
A very alive place.
For me, it was also a place to challenge economics. Because on the one hand, there was an economy that was invisible called home, family, neighborhood, and community. There was an economy that functioned based upon the subordination of women and the exploitation of minorities and elders and immigrants. And I thought, this is an invisible economy that needs to be made visible. And then the challenge was how to do so, because the economist said, what you're proposing is barter. And I said, no, barter is a commercial transaction. We're talking about something that is not a commercial transaction, that is about family. You don't have negotiated barter exchanges with your kids or your spouse or your grandparents. You just function together as a network, and there's a sense of reciprocal obligation. And if we could create a new kind of extended family, that would be right for the economy that was not the market economy. And then I was able to persuade some tax lawyers and persuade the IRS that this was not a commercial exchange, that this was something different that they had no jurisdiction over. And I liked the fact that they had no jurisdiction over family, neighborhood, and community.
So can we just keep going here?
Yes, absolutely. Please do. I want to hear from you.
So what Edgar had done, and there's, I tend to see the world very much half full, half empty. And on my good days, it's half full, and on my bad days, it's half empty. And it veers between the two rather regularly. So the half empty side of it, what Edgar had done was he had plunged time banking into a kind of ambiguous space, because of course it's not family, and nor is it economics, the economy, nor is it volunteering, nor is it's sort of none of the above. And people come stepping gladly into it. Oh, this sounds great. This sounds like Proctor. Oh, this sounds like whatever is in their mind, volunteering. And then it's none of the above. And it's both incredibly creative for that very reason and frustrating. And on the half empty days, it's like, where's the value add for time banking? I mean, I can't find it. And on the good days, it's like, wow, this is the most amazing thing, because it calls forth from people something kind of magical and transformative.
It makes trust possible between strangers in a way that you couldn't create by mandate, and you can't even create by an informal social connect. But the notion that when you're joining a time bank, you're really buying into a set of values, a set of relationships that are premised on honoring what each person can contribute, that are premised also on the notion that none of us made it alone. I entered the world 9 months in debt, and I've been going downhill ever since. And acknowledging that interdependence. And I had particular interdependence because I had a twin sister who was 15 minutes my elder. So I knew that I didn't make it by myself. She did the hard work. She came out first. And so the notion of interdependence and connectivity was really central to the thinking.
So Edgar finished with the word thinking. And I will have to tell you that it was a very, very cerebral thing. It was his thinking, my thinking, back and forth and back and forth. And when I joined Edgar, there had been about 100 time banks in the country, but I called them all up. That was my first thing, was to call them up. And there were about 30 that were still alive. And out of the 30, there were about 10 that were really active. So that was sort of what was our my felt starting point. That was in 1999. And in England, Martin Simon had taken time banking over there, and David Boyle.
Yeah, to get the ideas accepted, because my doctorate is in literature, not in economics, I had to go to the London School of Economics, learn their language, learn their algebra, and create a compelling case that this was theoretically sound. Their original position was marginal benefit has to exceed marginal cost, and if all you get is an hour for giving an hour, the two equal each other. And I had to prove to them that the marginal benefit of helping others had different kinds of returns, and the benefit would exceed cost even if the exchange was an hour for an hour and we didn't build in price, because they really were upset the notion that I was rejecting price in creating an economic system.
So he makes it sound very easy, but actually sometimes marginal benefit exceeds marginal cost, and sometimes it doesn't. This is the thing with time banking. You never do know. It's like entering a little lottery. Oh, my hour this time is going to get me something very lovely and big, or my hour is going to give me something kind of really small. So if you're thinking of it in those terms rather than in relationship terms, it's a dodgy proposition. Mm-hmm. It's like, really, I'm going to give an hour for that?
But even in economics, they acknowledge that benefit can be how you feel about yourself and how you feel about your sense of significance, of your sense that you make a difference, that you matter.
So with a time bank, you have to step into that frame of reference. You have to step into, this is not about what I'm getting. This is about how I am being. I mean, that's a whole different frame of reference. And it didn't, how can I say, this translation from the head to the heart and the mind, there was an absolutely brilliant community organizer by the name of Anna Miaris, who did that translation. She translated it like, I don't know, she was sort of amazing. She transformer, and she would just turn people on like that. Because
she had been a Cuban banker who fled Castro. So she knew banking, but she also knew heart.
She did. She was amazing. And she had this very strong accent from Cuba because she was 11 when she moved to the United States. She was a tiny little person of a person, and very funny and pugnacious. And anyway, she inspired people, and she translated it into hearts and hands, sorry. So it's head, hand, and heart. And she was always saying, one hand washes the other, two hands wash the face. She had all these sayings. And anyway, she was amazing. And what Edgar and I feel, this is my glass half empty bit, was we stayed up in the headspace very, very much, and allowed, I mean, sort of relied on other people to do the head, the hands and hearts bit very much.
Well, the other piece was you had to get funding to underwrite the infrastructure. A person could handle maybe 15 to 20 people, but when you got 75, 125, 200, the folks who were trying to launch time banks had this strange habit of needing to eat and needing to pay the rent. And so then the question became, how did you sell foundations? How did you sell government on this weird notion that if people actually helped each other, you could address social problems in a significant way? And at that point, the hidden blessing was the aging of the baby boomers, because it was clear as they aged and they lived with the isolation of their mates dying, their families moving away, that the need for connectivity, the need to create a new kind of support network had major fiscal implications, because if the only choice was either staying longer in a hospital or going into a nursing home because of a minor disability, the cost implications of that for Medicare and Medicaid and for government programs was going to be significantly beyond reach. And so we needed to create another economic system, or really revive a hidden economic system and renew it and revitalize it. And so time banking is really about rebuilding the economic system, the ecosystem that we all need to live, but that we ignore and also tend to exploit and commercialize, but that we don't honor and we don't renew.
So you just heard, what happened? I'm telling a story. We're telling you two different stories, and they're sort of intertwining with each other. Mm-hmm. So we're just carrying on with this intertwining story. And actually, for our whole partnership for the last 20 years, it's been this intertwining story. We've had two completely different experiences of time banking, in part because he was the founder and he's a white male, in part because I was not the founder and I'm a white female. And I can't tell you at the beginning how disconcerting it was at the beginning, because nobody would ever pay any attention to what I had to say. It was like, he's the man. And not only is he's the man, but he did have this vision and this mission. But meanwhile, out in the field were all these females. It was women who were taking this up. This was the core economy of home, family, neighborhood, and community. So zillions is too much. A lot of women were out there working and working and working to make this vision work, and doing the heart and hands bit, while Edgar sort of kept laying out this vision. And people in the wider world would respond to Edgar and this vision, but honestly not so much to all the work that the people were doing on the ground. And I think part of the history of time banking has been actually to try and get this stuff all much more thoroughly mixed together, the thinking and the head and the hands and the heart, all into a really coherent, working kind of system, really.
Yeah, and it also meant that you had to cross boundaries of race and nationality. And because I had come out of the civil rights movement, had been the speechwriter for Robert Kennedy, had worked to launch legal services, had created a law school in the nation's capital that was designated as an historic Black university. I had that credibility to cross those lines, and I needed all that credibility because I had also worked with Native Americans, and so and I was building on their economic traditions, and it was the ability to cross those traditions and have, frankly, some credibility in those worlds that time banking was able to spread across lines of race and class and neighborhood. Well, Chris at one point said, all this is going on, but are there core principles, are there operational principles? And it was her cross-examination that got me to say, well, let's look at what we're really saying. And the first principle, I think, was the principle that everybody has something to offer, that there is nobody, regardless of their needs, who can't make a difference in somebody else's life. And that was true of people who had speaking problems, who had walking problems. People could phone people even if they were bedridden. So the notion that you could do something that made a difference in somebody else's life, that you had something special, was the core principle. The second principle was we needed to honor work that the market did not honor. Believe it or not, listening is important. Caring is important. Just providing companionship. Walking somebody's dog when they're in the hospital may not look like a highly marketable skill, but it's invaluable. Digging up the ground that's frozen for a senior who wants to do planting is important. Helping a fifth grader, helping a third grader learn the alphabet, not a marketable skill, but it may be the one thing that can address the critical issue of why aren't third graders able to read and what happens thereafter. Kids listening to kids who have gotten into trouble, but they've gotten into trouble because they're acting out because of what happened at home. So there are a whole range of things that we need to honor as work, honor as contributions, that the market does not honor, that does not involve a marketable skill. The third piece was, in some sense, the most controversial. We called it reciprocity because, you feel really good when you give, but it's different to be on the receiving end. And if the only thing you can do is if that's your definition, that you're the recipient, then you don't get the joy, you don't get the sense of affirmation that you get by saying, I can help somebody else. I'm not just a recipient, I too am a contributor. And so the notion that reciprocity, that a pay it forward dynamic was going to be critical to sustaining it, because you can keep giving, but at some point you say, I've given all I can, and at some point you may even have a need, but it's not popular and it's not even sort of acceptable to say I have a need, and we needed to make it not only acceptable, we needed to make it a way of contribution, because if nobody will receive, nobody can give. And that has all kinds of implications. The fourth principle was really the notion of connectivity. It's not just individual transactions. It's 1 + 1 + 1 equals more than 3. It's the old phrase, no man is an island. We all exist in community. We all exist as part, and we need to renew that community. We need to renew a sense of mutual trust. And the last piece the last principle got added afterwards, because we had people telling us this isn't working, or what you're doing doesn't make sense. And we needed respect as a final principle. And respect meant you had to listen to people who might be telling you things you did not want to hear, but that you better hear if you're gonna correct what you're doing. So those became the 5 operating principles as we began to think about how did we upgrade the economic operating system, that because the economy doesn't value the people, doesn't value the work, only values service delivery, doesn't necessarily value community and something called social capital, and certainly doesn't value feedback loops that are critical to correction and to growth. So those became the core principles that, in fact, were more important than the technology. Now, the technology, time banking could not have really survived without the emergence of technology.
Slow down for a moment.
Okay.
We need to balance that story. Let's hear from the female side.
Somebody once described Edgar's brain as he described it when I first met him. He said, it's all a seamless web, Chris. It's a seamless web. Just a little story. I did the first real website for time banking. We had got a guy to do the website for us. He came in, he set up the thing, and then he got sick or something. So I suddenly ended up doing the website. And this was in the year 2000. It took me 6 weeks. It was a lot of work. But it was sort of became a kind of Zen experience, because these four, later became 5, 4 core values, every one of them kind of folded back into the other. It was like this loop that just kept folding and unfolding and folding and unfolding. There was a kind of internal coherence and integrity to this that was, at the end of 6 weeks, I was kind of floating around in this amazing, wonderful space. They're really powerful. And we realized at the end of that it was we actually started to get feedback from some time banks. I remember one in particular, San Antonio. They had been really struggling to get it off the ground. And we said, look, why don't you try just really thinking this through, the 4 core values. And she got back to us and she said, it's working. It's making such a difference to really talk about the core values and why we're doing this. And we went, aha, that was a major, major learning, actually.
Because it's not just about transactions.
Yeah, it was a huge learning. It was like, wow, yes, of course. We have to start emphasizing the 4 core values. I can't quite remember when the respect piece came in. I think people started to ask for something like that. And we said, yeah, let's put that in, and made it 5. And then actually people started to say, oh, could we add this in and that in? I was going, well, 5, maybe we just better stick with 5, okay? But there were some pretty good contenders for 6, 7, 8, and 9. But we stuck with the 5, and I think they are very powerful. They really sort of harmoniously and powerfully live with each other. Other people have taken the same time banking and shifted them around a little bit, or taken co-production and shifted them around a bit, but they've been very strong and sturdy values.
The other key piece I would want to say is that time banking tends to take 2 kinds of models. One is neighbors helping neighbors, building community, building social networks. But once you realize that you've also changed how you value certain kinds of labor, you can create a specialized time bank of just 5th graders helping 3rd graders to read, of just seniors helping seniors, of just youth who get into trouble coming before a jury, of teenagers who are paid in time banking, of just families, single moms who are dealing with multiple children and being charged with neglect and abuse, forming a functioning family. So the notion that this can be used as a specialized purpose, for a specialized purpose, meant that it had a new home in the nonprofit world and in the public sector world, which focuses on a particular public purpose and how are you going to realize it. And that was what birthed the notion of co-production and forced us to really articulate that without enlisting in any given domain, without enlisting the recipient, the student, the parent, the senior, the disabled person, the veteran, without enlisting them as a co-worker, you can't realize the mission that you're on. And that became a way of looking and dealing with any specific discipline, any specific profession, any specific nonprofit that had its mission, but didn't have a mission of just creating community, because that was not what they're funded to do, even though we know community is important.
So when I came along, I was still doing my doctorate. Everything was very analytical. So I looked around. Edgar had been writing this book. He actually, it was in some ways sort of co-written, because every morning he would write his piece. I would review it. We would discuss. So we discussed. We just endlessly for 3 months. We talked of nothing but the book.
Yeah.
And then we got an editor onto it, and she said, "This is unreadable," because he just made these. We'd fine-tuned it to a degree that reading it was like climbing a little mountain, going down the other side, climbing another mountain, going down the other side, climbing another mountain, going down the other side. By the time you'd climbed 10 mountains, you were exhausted, and there were 50 of them in the book. So together, actually, we completely restructured the book. So it's actually quite readable now, and people come to Edgar with it dog-eared. I mean, they've read it so much and so often. But in any case, I got a little bit lost. Oh, yes. These two models. So I would say that I was the one bringing my very analytical mind to this, saying, look, there's this distinct models. We need to spell out these models. We actually wrote a how-to manual with the Annie Casey Foundation, sort of figuring out there with these models and stuff. But meanwhile, this goes to the sort of difference between us working in our heads and people on the ground. To people on the ground, it was like, what are you talking about? I remember Marshy Black, who has the most powerful time bank in the country. Amazing time banking. She's been doing it since 1987.
Yeah. She's
just done so much amazing, beautiful work, and looking at us and saying with this kind of disgusted tone of voice, co-production, what are you talking about, co-production? Because she was just living in this world of making something happen.
But she had found a home in the medical profession, in the elder care industry, which the particular sponsor would change. It went from elder plan to the visiting nurses to now it's arch care. But under each sponsor, the ability to enlist the seniors as co-producers of mutual help, mutual support, dealing with the mental health issues and depression, as well as with the physical dimensions, had such an impact both on the marketing they did and on their retention, because people, once they were part of that system, yes, it wasn't just the doctors, it was the companionship, it was the collectivity.
So we were carefully sort of delineating these different ways in which time banking operates. And it's, I think, on one level, really important to have that clarity. On another, Marshy was, and others like her, going, what are you doing all this intellectual work? It's not about that. It's about being on the ground, making relationships happen. It's about, this hands and heart business, and you keep going up into your heads. And there was a certain frustration there, I think, that we, Edgar and I, were both sort of in this, or I'll call lofty sphere of the intellectualizing of it, when they were struggling to make it work, because it's not easy to make it work. There's certain ways of doing it that really, really work, and there's certain ways that don't work. And they were busy figuring that out on the ground. And we were a little bit oblivious to that, actually. We were looking at this very intellectually. And what I would say is, one of the people who really bridged that sort of intellectual to hands and hearts was Stephanie Rearick. Stephanie Rearick had came to it with her own experience of doing complementary currencies and, of Greenpeace and community organizing. And she was very politically savvy, and she brought a whole bunch of different sort of strands of thinking and practice and application that kind of started to knit everything together very, very beautifully. She did a wonderful job with that.
That was also a time when John McKnight's work with ABCD, Asset-Based Community Development, was evolving. And what John had really pioneered was an understanding that you can go at community building by looking at problems, or you can go at community building by identifying strengths and resources and utilizing them and mobilizing them. And initially, I think he looked a little bit suspiciously, and then he realized there was a natural kinship between ABCD, what he was doing, and the notion that we needed a medium of exchange that could enlist, ignite, and stream those assets in ways that that made community building possible at a different level with a different kind of continuity. So it wasn't just one. It wasn't just one project. It was, in fact, a whole labor force committed to an ongoing set of journeys and projects, and that was one piece. The other piece really was the role of the internet. DVDs were just coming into place. You put 10 people in a room, they can do about 300 to 500 things. You just don't remember who can do what, whether you have permission to reach them, and how you honor and record that. So my strategy was, we needed a medium of exchange, and we needed a tracking system, and we needed an information system that stored that, so that what you did, and some people just want to give, but then a few years later they do have needs and they can come in. And so the whole notion of giving and receiving and exchanges and creating ongoing relationships was made possible by the internet. And at first we were dealing with only one computer that could be reached through the web and and so you could tune into it. And then as the internet grew and as we began to see telephones that had that capacity, we had to constantly upgrade the software so that you can be walking around with a smartphone and have in that smartphone access to 500 or 1,000 people and do a search and find out exactly who, and then you can contact them. And that we found that ability to weave was important, but we also found that people don't necessarily do transactions unless there's an opportunity for gatherings. So we invented something new called birthday parties, and we invented something new called monthly potlucks, because it was around those coming together that then the individual transactions would evolve. Because people don't just generally phone up an isolated stranger, even if they're in the time bank. But it does mean that they don't feel, they feel there's trust, and they feel if they ask that we've created a new etiquette, that it's now permissible to ask, and it's even valued to ask. But getting a person to ask is in fact the hardest thing. We have very little difficulty getting people to volunteer, but a great deal of difficulty getting people to ask for help. So they will ask for help for their kids, they will ask for help for their church, for their organization. And so teaching people how to stimulate a stream of requests is part of what it's going to take to renew the economy of community. Because if nobody asks, everybody lives in his or her silo or his and her cave, and that's the beginning and end of it. And the notion that you're trying to create what I'm now calling a new ecology, an ecology of community, an ecology that really builds upon networks and systems and has those separate systems interacting with each other, that really redefines what we need. And as I look now, frankly, at the politics of where we are, you have the progressives saying we need more programs, and you have the right wing saying we need more self-reliance. But you have nobody saying, how do we renew community? How do we renew the networks of interdependence that are about trust, that are about the core values that caused us to say, hey, we've got 48 states, maybe we need a United States. And the whole notion of needing a United States, we need a united network of time banks, and we need the time banks championing the significance of community. I think that's our newest challenge, and we've come up with a new strategy. And the new strategy is, let's invade academia. Let's begin to understand that the nature of work is changing, that we need new career lines, that we need to redefine the competencies that are needed to cope with an ever-changing world. And so a few years ago, Chris and I started to give a course at my law school in something called system change. Because in case you hadn't, lawyers are good at picking fights. We know how to pick a fight, but we don't necessarily know how to create networks, how to become social architects. And so the notion that you can create a nonprofit, that you can help it develop a project and a plan and a trajectory, and that can bring people together. So we teach a course in system change at the law school, and now we've been asked by the university to teach it as an undergraduate course. And what we are doing is getting people to understand that each of these core principles involves a competency. Learning to appreciate the hidden capacities of people is one thing. Putting in place a system that honors their work, that creates rewards and incentives for them to do it, that creates systems of reciprocity, that builds networks. All of those involve skills. And so we are now developing a course in system change that will impart those competencies and have practicums. And the practicum, asking students to create instantly a nonprofit, is a major project and will take too long. So Chris has come up with a radical new initiative called Gatherings with a Purpose. And Gatherings with a Purpose does not mean that you have to create a nonprofit, that you have to have bylaws, that you have to have a board, that you have to have a 501c3. It means that you have to gather 7 or 8 or 10 people together and begin to get them to talk to each other about what they can do, what they'd like to do, and so she starts off, it's a sequence, and it's a sequence that I think has the potential to go viral, because it doesn't take a huge investment to get 8 or 10 people together for a gathering and then say, well, let's do an exchange, and then when we come back for a second gathering, let's talk about what it felt like to give, but also what it felt like to receive, because we're not used to talking about that. And then let's talk about maybe a project or an event that we can plan. Maybe we can do it, maybe we can paint a building, maybe we can do a garden, maybe we can have a birthday party. And then let's talk only after we've begun to understand our own individual and collective power, not just to have exchanges, not just to create an event or a project, but actually then maybe we ought to look at this weird thing called time banking and software to see if we want to either link up with a time bank or create our own time bank and have that time bank link. So that's the new initiative that's evolving. And our hope is that as we refine it, and we've done the first 2 or 3 prototypes, and we're hoping that as we develop that and is now available on gatheringwithapurpose.net, those materials are available on the internet, and we're hoping that time banks will use that both to expand membership and to birth new time banks using the gathering process as an introduction and as a process that from which new time banks can grow and can link. So we're hoping that if we create both ways of, if we can create a course where students learn about that in school as ways of dealing with social problems and as ways of beginning to think of a new career line as change makers, and if we begin to refine the ways in which one does that through gatherings, then we've created both a vehicle, an incentive, and a pathway.
That's great. I know when I visited you a little while ago, you talked about possibly doing a tour of academia and bringing the time bank messages to other colleges and universities. How would that look for you in your best vision of it? How would that time banking message be shared?
Well, one of the things we did last year was to collect time bank stories. And each story is in itself a moving incident where one stranger helped another stranger and a relationship grew. But each story is more than simply an isolated transaction. It embodies principles of connectedness. It embodies statements about the economy and what we're not valuing. It embodies statements about how we need to bridge traditions, what is possible in terms of dealing with dismantling racism, with dismantling ageism, with breaking down problems. So a story is more than a story. So what we're doing now each week is recording. She records the story as it's been written up in her lovely British accent, and I then, in my whatever you want to call New York accent, talk about what the larger significance of that is, that we're not just talking about an incident that evaporates, we're talking about a fundamental principle of coexistence, and we're really talking about what I'm calling a new ecological jurisprudence, a new way of thinking about jurisprudence as building ecological systems and as repairing damages and breaches in the ecology that we need to survive and grow and thrive as a species. And what I'm hoping will emerge, we will have those 50 stories out there in fewer than 50 weeks, but we're going to release them one a week. But we will probably put them all on a DVD and a book form, and then we'll publish it as a book. The title of the book is tentatively Yes We Can, because it is a statement of yes we can and how we can radically redefine the possible. Because we're so stuck with thinking that money and GDP define the possible, when in fact the untapped capacity in community is vast and I think almost unlimited, and building the kind of world we want, restoring an ecosystem to health, dealing with the kinds of pathologies that we know are out there, building civic engagement as a way of being is part of what we need to make happen. And so my hope is that the time banks will host meetings, because we have time banks in 50 states and 38 countries. We were in Taiwan, in South Korea, in Wales, in England, and time banking has taken on a life of its own. We hear about it springing up in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, as people read about it and as they use the software and as they develop their own kinds of software. And so as we see that, we think that that we can be hosted just for a gathering, and that we will use whatever ability we have just to arouse people's curiosity as to what this is all about. And I'm just very grateful that people feel that they can take it up on their own, and this empowers people. What we see is also the emergence of a new cadre of leaders who don't have to have a PhD, who don't have to have a resume, who don't have to have a long job description of histories of all employment, in order to understand that they can be the catalyst, that they can be the person in community to whom people come, and that's a role that is not just informal and invisible, but that is in fact formalized and recognized via time banking. So I talked about the course and system change.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to talk about ABCD.
That would be great. I'd love to hear about your
Yes.
experience.
Yes. So I went and did an ABCD training, asset-based community development training, as developed by originally John McKnight and what is his name? Do you know the name of the person?
Jody Kretzmann?
Yes, Jody Kretzmann. Who is now, I think, unable to continue. He had a stroke or something, sadly. It was 2.5 days in Chicago. There were 60 people doing it, so it was a big crowd. And it was quite wonderful, actually. It was quite wonderful because it alternated between many long lists. Actually, they worked off of this PowerPoint, where over the years they've developed their sort of, if you're going to do this, think of this and this and this and this, and there's lots and lots of lists on a PowerPoint, which they send to you, and took me 20 minutes to download. It's a big PowerPoint, but very valuable. I mean, there's stuff in there that, what can I say? So we did, it alternated between these are the principles that you should apply for organizing community, building community, one of them being work block by block by block, one block at a time, storytelling, all these different things. And some of them we actually did a little practice session. It's a bit weird because we were at tables of 8, and they'd say, you have 10 minutes to each share your story with each other. You can imagine 10 community organizer, loquacious kind of people around a table telling their stories. Maybe 3, maybe 4 people got to tell their stories. But it was, I loved the feeling in the room. It was wonderful because it was very much about people caring for their communities. All different kinds of people in there, from young community organizers just starting out to religious pastors in their 60s who'd seen it all, you know, been there, done that. I was clearly one of the oldest in the room, but not, I was definitely up there as one of the oldest, maybe not quite the oldest, but nearly. But just really, it was really very diverse. No white, black, Hispanic, younger, older, newer to this, older at it, old hands, religious, non-religious. It was great. It was a lovely mix. And I felt I just really was reinforced because time banking and ABCD are so aligned, and Edgar can talk to you in a moment about the way that they sort of springboarded off of each other. And actually in the session, they actually did a piece on time banking. in the training, which was nice and a little strange, because there I was, being told about time banking by this person who knows of it, but I don't think has ever done it. And people who've done time banking routinely, and you will know this, to do it is to learn it, is to learn about it. It's to theorize about it. And this was part of the dynamic that I've spoken about at the beginning. There I was with Edgar, happily theorizing away, and they'd say, "You don't understand." And it's true, you have to do it to really understand it. So the person who presented did a lovely job of presenting it, but he's not ever done it himself. So it lacked that certain sort of quality that comes when somebody's really grappled with this, what I call this kind of ambiguous space that Time Bank lives in, and makes it real. And people who've made it real just know they're onto something really, really, really special. But you have to get there. Okay, now I'm done.
Well, and for instance, in social work, you have a divide between the folks who do sort of psychiatric social work and counseling and folks who do community organizing. And historically, the resources have much more gone into individual practice and psychotherapy and the investments in the community organizing part have been diminished. In law, you have people earning money suing people, but you have many fewer people helping nonprofits organize, helping communities organize. But in every field, they're discovering, well, in health, they're discovering the social determinants of health. In politics, we're discovering the need for civic engagement.
Well, there's the social determinants of wealth. I mean, as well as the social determinants of health, there's the social, all of this is sort of mixed in. I love the social determinants of health because it gave philanthropists and nonprofits the opportunity to say, oh, we can escape from our silo. Guess what? Health is impacted by this and this and this and this and this. It all belongs under the silo of health. Lovely. So it's a kind of boundary breaking concept, which is long overdue. And that's the thing about time banking, is that it applies across.
I think what it would mean if in every elementary school, particularly in low-income neighborhoods, fifth graders help third graders with their homework. They don't do that. We invest so heavily in what individual, highly skilled, dedicated, underpaid professionals will do, but we don't try and enlist, we don't try and create a viable ecosystem in which the public purpose can flower.
So that is so true. So going to food bank, I just received an inquiry from a food bank about the seniors. They've got a skills exchange, but it's sort of not working. Why is it not working? Could we help? Could time banking be a help in any way? I know this dynamic really, really, really well because we tried with a food bank to get time banking going, and the food bank, with all the best of intentions, they kind of siloed it off. Here you are, clients, you can get on with doing your nice thing together. We're there, we support you, rah, 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 rah. But are we going to help you? Well, not so much, because we're really busy giving out food. We're really busy.
And that's what we're paid to do and funded to do.
And that's what the funders want us to do. They don't want us to give you support organizing yourselves. It's very nice, but we'd love you to do it, but we're paid to do that. And so when this person from a food bank said, it's just not happening, I could say, yeah, and I know why. You have to give people supports for this stuff. But anyway, so.
Well, think of what you're evaluated for what staff does. You're not evaluated for what the recipients do. That's not part of the data that's collected, and that's not how you get grants or how you get funding.
I mean, I think there are little inroads into that now.
There are, but
so I have to share with you this story about there was a request for proposals put out by a local funder here, big funder, and they said, we want to support systems change. Edgar and I went, yay, this is fantastic, you know, we can do systems change. So then they laid out what that meant, and it said, in this case law, or this case, it was all about professionals changing their systems. It was nothing to do with how these professionalized systems interact with the community. And we wrote back and said, excuse us, but you have missed a rather vital component in all of this, which is the community that they're all supposed to be serving. That is a system too. How can you just blithely ignore that system while you're focusing on all these professional systems? And they wrote us back and said very easily, actually, we're not interested in that piece. We're only interested in the professional systems. Done. End of story. I was like, there is a blindness there that is just like, because, you know, just like when I came into all of this, I was living in this sort of headspace. So all of these professionals have been trained up into that headspace. They've left the heart and hands bit behind, and then they don't see it anymore. They just, it's not real for them. What's real, you know, they saw systems, they saw professionals. There you go. That was a very frustrating moment, actually.
They're missing the forest, only
Yes.
focusing on a few trees.
Yes.
I like that you're talking about
they know how to prune them, and they know how to they know how to plant one or two, but they don't know how to protect the forest.
Fertilize them and all of that.
I feel like we could talk forever. I know that both of you have to, you know, go on with your days, but there are just a few things I would like to end up with. I mean, I think it's good for time banking to some extent that you have lived in your heads a little bit and concentrated on systems. While you were gone out of the room, Chris, Edgar talked a little bit about, you know, getting the software off the ground.
Right.
And I would just love to know how it came to be named Community Weaver. I just love that name, Weaver. And then also, I do want to acknowledge that you two have put in quite a bit of your personal assets to be able to make time banking work. And that if people feel called, you know, to support this, whether you're a time banker currently or not, you can go to Timebank's website, and I'll let you say a little bit about that. If you feel led to donate, or if you feel led to begin a time bank, there is a very, very modest cost to use the software. So if you could just talk a little bit about those points.
Okay, so let's start with Community Weaver. So that was a very interesting process. We had somebody by the name of Mark McDonough come along. He loved the idea of time banking, and he had inherited some money. And he very, very generously said, I'm going to give it to time banking to get software. And we need to have a name for it. And so we would go up, time bankers from all over. Again, we were a tiny little movement at that time. So time bankers from all over, about 20 of us, 30 of us, descended on his home, which was right on the beach in Manchester, Manchester by the Sea in Massachusetts. And we camped out in all around the house and stuff, and we got together and thrashed out a name. And Community Weaver was the one that sort of was the favorite, was the shared favorite. I will just say afterwards that we learned down the road that some woman had a person who was doing community work had created a game called Community Weaver. And she felt that we had sort of taken the name from her, which was very, we didn't even know of her work. And it was like, so we knew of her work, but we didn't connect the dots at all. There was oblivious. So I felt very bad about that afterwards, but it was too late. I mean, we'd been calling it Community Weaver for some time when we found that out. Anyway, it was Community Weaver was the choice of the group. We thrashed through many, many names as was done. And we all just loved Community Weaver. It was felt like this is it. This is what this is all about. So that was that one. What was the next one? Donating to the time banks.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we would love. We would love to have some donations come in to support time banking and the software. I think Edgar wants to say something.
Well, and each upgrade has been very expensive. We were told
we're on Community Weaver 3 now, so first 1, then 2, then 3.
And actually, to do that, when foundation funding ran out, we faced a major decision because it was costing us, between the IT, the programming, the IT support, the servers that we were using from Amazon, it was costing us close to $8,000 a month to run the software. And the money wasn't coming in. We had to make 2 decisions. One, did we continue it ourselves? Because at that point, there were thousands of people who were relying on it, and we felt we couldn't let them down. And second, foundations, we had ceased to be the newest fashion in foundations. And so we just had to decide to mortgage the house to do that. And that was a decision that we both made because we just felt what we're committed to is too fundamental to let evaporate and let disappear. And we knew that if it was just one more forgotten piece, if it was dismissed as one more nice but forgotten experiment in community development, that its potential to address really the schisms in this country, the divide in this country, the problems of baby boomers, the numbers of kids. We knew we had a tool that had proven its capacity to function as a catalyst to heal and to renew. And so we just made that decision. We also made a decision that we could no longer give it away free. And so we went to an elaborate process of dialogue with the users that must have lasted at least 6 months as to what would be a reasonable fee that would not discourage people, that would not be so prohibitive that a local group couldn't use it. And we came down to something that worked out to about an average of $3 per year per user for an organization. $3 to $3.50. And that was accepted, and we didn't lose users as a result of putting that in place. And if we can just frankly triple the volume of users, it will be self-sustaining. But right now it brings in about 20,000 a year at the volume that we presently have, and we'd love to, if we could triple that. My hope would be that this could be self-sustaining, that it would not depend on us, because I don't want things depending on us.
So yes, so we would truly appreciate some funding towards that. That would be a huge help. So what was the next thing you mentioned? I want to just mention Gathering with a Purpose really quick.
Edgar did speak a little bit about that, but I would definitely love to hear your thoughts since you were the developer. Before we move to that, can we share the website where people can get more information?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the place to do the donation is www.timebanks.org. It's plural, timebanks.org. And they'll see a picture, an image of a cup. Please put into the cup. That would be lovely. Underneath the cup.
I would like to see that cup half full or better.
Yes.
And I love that you're saying too,
brimming over.
Yeah,
Yes.
And I love that you're saying too that if we tripled the number of active users, that would be tripling the number of time bankers out there. That would be another way to get to sustainability.
Absolutely.
And I think that would be a lovely outcome if people heard this and then felt compelled to either look on timebanks.org and find out, hey, is there an existing time bank near me that I can join? Or they're curious, do I have what it takes to be a time bank leader, and explore resources there to get one started in your area.
It may be appropriate to say that neither of us receive compensation, nor does
Right, we don't get anything.
and that the house is provided as the headquarters without compensation, because that's the level of commitment that we've made. That you walk the talk.
And as lovely of a house as it is, if anybody goes by, I can tell you that it is a wonderful energy. I just love seeing that bookcase behind you, and I just loved seeing, you know, how you live in your part of it and how sharing you are with the rest of it to make way for offices, to make way for other people, you know, to enjoy your lovely space. And,
well, thank you. It is a lot. Right now, the roofers are up on the roof. We've got some big leaks that need to be fixed, but because it's an old house, as you know, it's from 1915, so it's over 100 years old now. 104, creaky. It's a creaky old house, but it is a great house.
It was well built.
Somewhat crooked.
So I would love,
no straight
I would love
lines
to
in this
hear-
house, but hopefully, it's presumably well, because it's still standing, but anyway.
so I would love to hear more about Gathering with a Purpose from
Yes.
Chris. And then if you have
And then
time,
to close out.
since you've got your bookshelf behind you, I would love to just hear, you know, what's on your reading list, what books inspire you that besides your own that we've mentioned, that you would recommend for others that were maybe formative for you coming to some of your ideas, or just that you think are worth reading that would, you know, expand people's ideas around this new ecology.
Okay, all right. So Gathering with a Purpose. So the Gathering with a Purpose reflects actually a lot of what we've been talking today. We've got something going. So it seemed we used to have a training. We developed a training, and we developed that training actually. It was a big, big effort. It was part of this journey that I was talking to you about combining head and hands and heart. We worked with Timebank coordinators. A whole team worked for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we combined sort of all of our different knowledge bases and skills to create this beautiful 2-day Timebank training. And people loved the 2-day training. At the end of it, we'd get these amazing reviews. This was fantastic, 2 days, all wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And then 6 months or 9 months later, I'd look and say, how many of them have actually got a successful Timebank going? And it was a rather small percentage. And thought, you know, maybe that's common with trainings, that's the sort of outcome. But it seemed to me that we must be missing something. There's something going on here. We're giving them all the how-to in the world. They've got all the things that they need to do, and a successful Timebank wasn't coming out of it. So it goes back to this, what we were saying at the very beginning. There's this sort of unknowable bit about Timebanking. There's this bit that you can't quite put your finger on it, but it's there. And I found myself thinking, what if we could get people to put their finger on it before they started to try and do the how-to? And that led to, honestly, many, 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 many months of sort of, how do we get to that sort of magical something? And in the end, it was actually a rather sort of a simple formula in the end of putting together the core values, asking people to share what they do, talking about really needs where they could step forward and help, and then actually saying, how can we actually put this into practice? I mean, and you've done it 4 times now, and you've
yes,
actually,
I loved it every time.
It's fantastic.
Got another one planned. I've got another one planned for July 13th.
That is fabulous. No, and I've done it 3 times, and each time, so you've done much bigger groups. I started with 2 people coming. It was meant to be about 5 people, only 2 actually turned up. And we looked at each other and said, what? 2 of us for 3 hours? 2 people, but honestly, they loved it. And then the next one was 4 people. And one of the people said, we'll probably have to stop early, won't we? And I said, well, let's see. And again, it was like I actually had to say time when it was time, because they would have gone on and on. And the third one, it was just equally lovely with 7 people. So it's growing slowly. Yeah, and it's rich, thought-provoking. I mean, it's just really good stuff, and people love coming to them. So I think it does sort of tap into that. Who knows what it is, but it seems to tap into it. And my premise is it's like planting the seeds for action. And you have actually much more, if more than I have, because I've done it with people in these tiny little groups. They haven't quite been ready to sort of get into, let's make this happen or let's make that happen. But I have had people responding afterwards and saying, okay, so I'm geared up and I'm ready to go, you know, which is a different kind of energy than used to come out of the training, where people were all kind of a bit gobsmacked. How were they going to, how are they going to make all of that happen? This is like a little easy entry point into, I can make something happen. I can learn from that something, and then I can make something more happen. So you start this wheel of learning and doing and learning and doing and watching and learning and doing and watching. So I think it's very, very cool. And it needs to be, it's available, as you know, all the materials are available online for free for the Gathering with a Purpose workshop. There are some sister workshops that go into it more advanced into actually creating the time bank, but the Gathering all by itself does a beautiful job all by itself. So yes, encourage people to go to gatheringwithapurpose, or one word, .net, gatheringwithapurpose.net, and they'll learn.
And I will give that my seal of endorsement. I think it does hit that sweet spot between training and a potluck. It feels much more purposeful than just simply a potluck.
Right.
I think that busy people sometimes need a reason to come together. And if it just, quote unquote, just feels like I'm going to a potluck, that feels a little lightweight. Training feels heavy. And this just seems to be that right spot in between, where you have some idea, it awakens a purpose within you, but yet it's open enough that you don't have to define the purpose in advance. So
yes, that's right. And people get to share with each other. Really, it's amazing how quickly they start going pretty deep into what's really meaningful for them, in a way that I think even the potluck didn't. I mean, I've been to many potlucks and time banking potlucks, and they stay on the level of exchanges, which is nice, but not quite down into that level of what am I about, which is, after the second one of the people there said, I wish we had more opportunities to talk like this with each other.
And you can. People can do that facilitator training themselves. And that's the beautiful thing too, is I feel like in planning for it, now I've created an opportunity where I can assign people roles. They can therefore gain time bank credit for helping me in those roles. And therefore we get more people comfortable with doing the process, and then we can have more gatherings. So I just want to say, I also love training and I love potlucks. So to me, it's not an either or, but a both and. But I really am very grateful to you, Chris, for developing that and for sharing it when you did. It really breathed new life into me as a time bank coordinator. It was just on the edge of burnout after about, coming up on the third year and just feeling like we're at a standstill, So thank you so much for that.
Oh, I'm so glad.
And I see Edgar brought in a big stack of books. He took my homework assignment very seriously.
I was gathering different books that I'm presently reading.
I love it.
Or dipping into. One is The School to Prison Pipeline, Structuring Legal Reform. A second is Everything is God. The third is Art of Gathering. A fourth is Unexpected Economics.
Unexpected Economics. That's a new one for me.
That is one of those great courses. Have you ever heard of the great courses?
I have.
They're like CD, and they come on DVDs and stuff. And then they give you a transcript of the DVD. This is a transcript of the DVD.
Very cool. Very cool.
Another is Fair Game, which is really a brilliant book.
This is amazing.
On reframing the struggle to deal with racial justice.
Who's that by?
It's the Praxis Project put it together, so it's a collection of people, but it's really a brilliant collection.
It is very good.
I will look these up and include links in the show notes.
Another is another is Soul Matters. Who I Am Makes a Difference. Another is a brilliant thing from Wales. This is fantastic.
But how do you get hold of
Seeing
this?
is Believing. You may have to get copies from Wales, but it's got the stories and it's got an explication. Another is...
And just very, very briefly, in Wales, they have taken up co-production really seriously from the government level, non-profit, across the board. They're doing co-production, and it's amazing. And that little piece is a story of how co-production is changing things there. It's a very, very interesting thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Edgar, you've got rather
Another is
here.
The Power of Purpose. That's probably enough. But
and who is that one by? Just in case there are multiples. The Power of Purpose.
The Power of Purpose.
Who is the author?
Who is the author of that one?
The author of that is a Richard Leider. It's Creating Meaning in Your Life and Work is the subtitle. I just think that Chris has identified really three intersecting sectors of thinking that come together in time banking. One is the economic exchange piece. A second is the social dynamic of friends and community. And a third is the spiritual piece of purpose. And all three of them intersect in this sort of weird, nonlinear way with time banking. And time banking doesn't fit neatly into any one of them, but it does invoke all of them. And that's so that I think the real power of time banking is purpose, is asking yourself each day, why are you here? And what can you do to make a difference? And what can you do for your life to mean something to others? And that intersects with economics and intersects with networking and social dynamics, and intersects in a spiritual way with whatever takes us into spiritual inquiry. So you can't go wrong in any of those domains, but you ultimately have to come back to asking yourself, why are you here and what are you prepared to try and make happen, knowing that you can never do enough, but knowing that you can perhaps set in motion some things. And my hope is always to set in motion something that I don't control and can't control.
I think you've done that, sir. I think you've done that very thing. So congratulations. Yeah.
Well, thank you for this recording and for the sharing.
I can't find the Social Startup Success book. What happened to that? Do you know? It was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. And this is called How to Thrive in the Next Economy.
Ooh, that sounds good.
And I actually by John Thacker. Oh, you've got it. Social Startup Success. I'm holding this up because I love this book.
That sounds great too.
How the best nonprofits launch, scale up, and make a difference. It's beautifully done. Kathleen Kelly Janus. And we use this actually in our systems change class. And one of the people in the class was telling me how she was in this meeting where they were trying to figure out something. She said, I directly used the thinking from this book, and she said it changed the whole dynamic of the meeting. This is a really good book. And this How to Thrive in the Next Economy, Designing Tomorrow's World Today, is a bit of a wake-up call about the ways in which people, businesses, society, how we have to change collectively. So there's got a lot going on in this. This is from Europe. This is so it may be rather expensive over here. I bought it actually when I was in the UK. So that might not be available here, but it's a good one. Oh, well, thinking systems. So this is all stuff from our thinking systems change stuff. So we use this in our system change class. And then there's the stuff that Gwen Hallsmith wrote.
Right.
We should share. There's a colleague by the name of Gwen Hall-Smith who has written something called Sustainable Cities. It's a lovely, lovely, lovely book.
I'm looking at my shelf and seeing if I've got it right up there. It
Oh,
seems
you
like
think you
one
might
I would
have
have,
that?
but I have many that are close to that. I have Sharing Cities right there, but I don't think I have that one, so I will have to look for that.
And there's
Thank
your
you.
book. I honestly want to end up by saying we haven't hopped online and purchased your book. But
No. I will send you a copy. You do not have to purchase it. That is my gift to you.
well, that would
for
be a lovely
spending
book.
for
And
spending the time here.
well,
Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't gotten that in the mail yet, but that is my gift to you, and I will
well,
be
that would
sending.
be just lovely. And I've seen all sorts of good things about it on the Facebook that people are just loving. And it's a
Good.
combined. You were
It's
a whole bunch of
an
people.
anthology.
Yes.
An anthology. Yeah,
Yes.
and I still think that would be okay. I guess we're still recording, but I might edit this out. I still think an anthology book would be a really cool fundraiser, that I know you're collecting stories and you're doing the DVD and everything.
It would be amazing.
That same publisher that does the anthology stories, I was thinking, let's just say that my time bank contributed one story and I was able to, get maybe 100 of our members to say, oh, I want a copy. I would buy that for sure.
Yes.
And then we could
idea.
persuade you two to come here as part of your book tour. If we already knew that we had so many, seats sold to a speaking engagement and, book signings and that kind of thing, then, maybe the stories would kind of be the beacon that would guide you on a tour and allow you to meet up with some of the local universities. That was kind of one idea I had.
That is
so we sort of sell the copies before you print the books so that you've already got an audience. It's kind of crowdfunded in advance.
We both love that idea, and then the question is when and how to do it.
When and how. To be continued.
We'll have a planning session, right?
But I would be willing to be, a project manager or some kind of coordinator if you were like, the people that gave it the credibility, or, you write the foreword or you give it the context.
Right.
And then I think that we already know the people in the various time banks,
that would be amazing.
I mean, we meet every month, right? We meet every month with leaders so we could just say, hey, this is something we're doing and this supports, the software and the framework that helps all of us. And it would hopefully do well to promote, time banking as a lifestyle and cover those various different parts. And that's the thing I like about an anthology book is maybe it is more economic than another, but another one, it could be mostly heart. Another one, it could be mostly, hands.
Yes.
And I think that the collection would, kind of round out how it's important to people all over. So to be continued.
That's a lovely idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I just was so grateful that I got to spend time with you when I was in Washington, D.C. a little while ago. And thank you for making the time to spend with me. And I love that we did our own little mini time banking. You gave me a ride back to my hotel after providing me dinner at your place. And then I was able to reciprocate the following evening, at least on the dinner part. So that was really fun for me to exchange time with two of my favorite time bankers.
Well,
and spreading that spirit is so important.
It really is. We're so grateful to you for doing this, really, because being skillful with the media, all the different media these days, it calls for a lot. You have to have a lot of knowledge about a lot of things. And I'm just looking at your equipment right there. I mean, it takes a setup. Yeah. So we and it is important to get the word out. Actually, one of the books I didn't flash at you is Show Your Work. It was called Show Your Work.
Show Your Work?
Yes.
Okay. I will check that out too. And you might be delighted to know that I actually need to wrap up because I need to go do a time bank exchange.
Oh, wow.
I am driving two other time bankers to the grocery store. One of them has a knee problem right now and needs some help with lifting, and she can't drive right now. So
Yeah, yeah.
I need to go pick them up and help out my fellow time bankers.
Perfect ending.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, you've been listening to another episode of CoThrive Community, and I want to thank our guest once again, Dr. Chris Gray and Professor Edgar Cahn, for spending time with us to tell us about some of their origin stories of time banking and where they are now, and hopefully where it can go into the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you.